Okay, everybody. Today I am happy to welcome to Autoimmune Rehab Cindy Dupuis, and Cindy is going to share with us some things about perimenopause and menopause and how those things work and can help or will affect people who have autoimmune conditions, and really, I guess, in some ways, even women that don't have autoimmune. But since this is obviously about an autoimmune podcast, we're going to focus mostly on that. So, welcome to Autoimmune Rehab, Cindy. Why don't you start by sharing us a little bit about who are you and what brings you onto the podcast today?
Well, Anna Laura, the reason why I am here is I'm hoping that I can shed a little bit of light on how when we move into perimenopause and menopause, how that can affect the immune system and then affect autoimmunity as well. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here. A little bit about me. I have been a functional medicine practitioner for about oh gosh, over 20 years and been helping both men and women in that space or from that lens. And I moved into the perimenopause and menopause space probably about 7 years ago. Specifically, the reason behind that was I was watching my own clients who were moving into and through that and we were losing some ground. And I'm going, I know how they eat. I know what their lifestyle is. We're missing a piece here. And so that on top of watching my contemporaries, just start having more aches and pains, seeing the doctors more, and just losing vitality. It really got me into digging into that space. And even though I had been here for a while, I had had my own HRT journey. Okay. I really felt like I needed to really learn about it on a much deeper level so that I could help other women move into and through it and make decisions on their own as to what they wanted to do. So that's a little bit about me and how I got into this space. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure it's really helpful and useful too because, you have a lot of doctors out there that they may even specialize in autoimmunity. Some of them, really know what they're doing. Some of them don't. I've talked a lot about on this podcast, But even the ones that a lot of times do know what they're doing, sometimes they don't have maybe that expertise. So with handling the whole perimenopause and menopause once somebody's got an autoimmune condition. And obviously, we have some people that listen to this podcast that know they have an autoimmune condition. They've got their diagnosis, they know what it is, and they might even be a little younger. Maybe they're not quite to that phase yet. We have some
Right.
that are already in that phase, and then some that don't even have a diagnosis. So tell us a little bit what you have learned about how exactly can the immune system and some of the challenges of autoimmune change as somebody gets into that perimenopause or menopausal stage of life.
I would say probably the biggest way, and this is what we start seeing in perimenopause, okay, is, sometimes the symptoms of what's happening on an autoimmune level can mimic a little bit of what someone might think is perimenopause. All right. So there might be a lot of fatigue. There might be, problems with the digestive system. There might be a lot of different things that are going on, which might not be just the loss of hormones, but an autoimmune condition that may not have been detected before that's all of a sudden triggered. So what happens first in perimenopause usually is that we start to lose our progesterone. That's what goes first. And when understanding the roles of our hormones really helps, I think, get a broader picture on how far-reaching they are. I think when we are kind of brought up until we hit this point is that, our sex hormones are basically for procreation, for fertility, for having our periods, right? I mean, we really don't talk about our hormones in any other way other than that. But nothing is siloed, and estrogen hits every single organ tissue in our body. And progesterone is kind of a sidekick, but it's just important. And when it comes to autoimmune, I would say it might be even a little bit more important than estrogen. So what progesterone does, it's very calming. Okay, it's calming throughout the entire system. It helps to keep the GABA receptors nice and steady. And I'm sure you've talked about this on your podcast, how our brain, how our vagus nerve, how all of that is involved in everything that's going on in our body, including how our immune system works, our reaction, our stress, our inflammation, which, contributes to upping anything that pertains to autoimmunity. So I'm sure you've talked about that on your show. So when that progesterone goes down, that calming goes down, we're going to be reacting more. Our whole body is. So that's one thing. The other part of this is that estrogen, as I mentioned, affects every single organ system in our body. And a couple of things that become very noticeable is that a lot of women will start putting weight on in the center. They'll just start putting weight on out of nowhere. It seems to be out of nowhere. And part of what's happening is that our ability to be insulin sensitive, our ability to squash down inflammation, all is being adjusted here. So estradiol in particular is really important when it comes to being able to keep the body on an even keel. So we start to lose these, right? And, so many women, there's different autoimmune diseases, right? But I think a lot that we talk about, unless you're really in this space, would be, let's say, Hashimoto's. Okay, that's a very common one. And a woman may have had her antibodies tested at one point, but usually they're not tested unless there are some indications. I always test my young women to see if there's any antibody activity going on because I often see that there is, whereas it hasn't attacked the thyroid yet, so the doctor's not going to test it. So we keep an eye on that, right? We can bring those antibodies down. Well, when progesterone starts to wane, okay, and then later on estrogen, all of a sudden these antibodies can start kicking up. And a woman may not even be aware that she has these antibodies that's been not dormant, but been kind of held at bay, right? And be kicked up, and then all of a sudden she has a thyroid condition caused by an autoimmune disease. So we can have that going on. Um, or anything can trigger us, right? Usually autoimmune disease is triggered by something. It can be triggered by an infection. It can be triggered by a really stressful situation. It can be triggered by a digestive system. And again, I'm sure you've talked about this on your podcast before. And just a lot of irritation with the digestive system. It can be for a variety of different reasons, can trigger an autoimmune response. Okay. And and again, it kind of depends on genetics. It depends on a lot of different things. So if you have digestive issues, okay, I'll talk about this, all right? And you can have um, often women will have chronic digestive issues throughout their lives, and then when they move in again into perimenopause and menopause, it can become a lot more noticeable and a lot more louder. All of a sudden, we can have more food sensitivities, we can become more bloated, more IBS, more of everything that's going on. And if there's something going on in the digestive system, again, that can trigger the autoimmune. So here again, your estrogen plays a big role in your digestive system that a lot of women don't realize, especially when we start to move into menopause. And we know that estrogen has to do with collagen, right? With skin, with tissue. We know that. Okay, you hear about slathering vaginal estrogen on your face,
Yeah.
right? On Instagram, you
Yeah.
hear that, right? So it can help with your collagen, your wrinkles on your face. But if you move that to the different areas of her body, the ligaments, okay? The valves. Okay, we have all of these sphincters throughout our digestive system, right? So we want to keep the integrity of the sphincters. really nice. And estrogen is a part of that. So someone will find that they have more acid reflux all of a sudden because maybe the valve integrity is no longer there. Or estrogen has a role in making stomach acid, which has a role in breaking down our protein and making our nutrients available to us and just getting food moved through, right? Estrogen also has a role in making something called choline and phosphatidylcholine. And why is that important? It's important because it helps our body, it's an integral part of making bile. And people, when they think of bile, they think of that green stuff that maybe we,
Yeah,
threw
that's
up.
typically what I think of too. Yeah.
Yeah, right? No, bile is actually made in our liver. And it's what I call liquid gold because it really is with all the functions that it has in our system. So our liver makes bile to combine with our toxins and even our hormones, the hormone metabolites, so the stuff that we don't need anymore. And then it moves on this liquid gold bile, okay, into our gallbladder where it's stored until our body, our digestive system, signals to our gallbladder to release it. Okay. So it's released at the top of our small intestine, and the functions of bile is to, there's many. One is to sterilize our food. Two is to help us break down and absorb our fat. And that's why when we have gallbladder issues, right, we might have to race to the bathroom really quickly because the fat just goes right through us and, makes us have a bowel movement and it's usually loose. So it helps with that. It helps to absorb our fat soluble vitamins. It also helps, absorbing fat, okay, helps with our skin, helps with our scalp, dandruff, things like that. Um, it also will help with peristalsis, so helping the small intestine move everything down into the large intestine. So that can be an underlying factor when it comes to IBS or SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is often is the underlying cause of IBS. So, you can have all these different things going on, and if they aren't working properly and they're existing or they've been persisting for a while, we can have a lot of inflammation that starts to happen. And that inflammation will, just fire up that immune system,
It
right?
absolutely does. Yeah. So let's move on then and talk about something important. You mentioned already, of course, that it can be really challenging to get your antibodies tested.
Yes.
I've been there, done that, went through three
Okay.
different doctors, and then I went on the third doctor. The first time he tried to send it to insurance to get it tested, they still didn't test them. And it was it was a whole thing. But
Yeah.
and I've talked to a lot of people that have had challenges getting those tested. But talk to us a little bit about what other lab tests do you feel like people need to ask for, or maybe in some cases even insist on getting that, are not part of your normal repertoire of labs that doctors typically run.
Wow. Before we go to what they don't typically run, I would like to circle back to what they ignore. They might run it, but they'll ignore it. And this just happened in client last week. And it's a gentleman, he actually has an autoimmune disease, okay? And his vitamin D came back at, I think, like 25. And the range is like 30 to up to 100. That's
Mhm.
normal range, right? A big, huge range there. First of all, your clients also need to know what optimal levels are versus normal levels because optimal does not mean normal. We need to know what it is for you too. So you need to have patterns, what's normal for you. When something moves outside of that normal pattern for you, you need to observe that. And doctors don't spend the time looking at that history. They don't.
Well, they
And
don't, and I've heard, and I know you've studied this, so you know this too, that when they say quote unquote normal, it's basically the average of all the different people in the country and what their levels are. And that's not, normal in our society has become to be sick, not
yes,
well. So
yes,
normal labs are not what you actually want. You want optimal labs, which is going to be a lot different than the normal, which is, quote unquote
Exa
sick, you know?
exactly. And to your point here, most of the people that go in to get labs are sick who do, I mean, their lab, so the labs take everyone, right? Like you said, and the common person, but usually the people that are in labs are more the people who are sick and older. So that normal, yeah, we don't want to be. So, yeah, so he came in, his vitamin D levels were below normal. Now, vitamin D is essential in modulating the immune system.
Oh
All
yeah.
right, not just fighting infection off, but modulating that. So, to me, for the doctor to not have said a word about it, I just want to reach out and,
Yeah.
it's like, come on.
It's like, well, how can you miss something so basic, you know,
Yeah,
needing a vitamin D
exactly.
supplement, you know?
Exactly. There's a big helicopter out here. Sorry. Um, so that's one that's usually doctors will do, and you should insist on having vitamin D checked, especially if you tend to run low, and that shouldn't be a problem. So some of the other things that I like to have checked specifically for autoimmune, I mean, I mentioned the thyroid, right? So that would be more of your thyroid antibodies. Um, you're probably more versed as far as other autoimmune diseases, what to have done, but what to have tested to keep your body running along. I would say looking for inflammatory markers because inflammation obviously will drive the immune system. So that would be the C-reactive protein, HSCRP. And that shouldn't be that difficult to ask for and to get. That would be one. I would look at ANA, would look at that maybe sed rate. I always look at iron and ferritin together because even though, and most doctors won't test that until they see maybe your RBCs or hemoglobin or hematocrit, or maybe a little bit wonky, then they'll test that. But I think here again, we can have subclinical iron deficiency. Ferritin is a marker for iron storage, but it's also a marker of inflammation. So you have to look at all of it together. Everything I'm mentioning here should not be that difficult to ask for and to get done. And don't tell anybody I said this, but
Well, we are on a podcast after all, so people are
we
listening.
are, isn't that? Okay. Sometimes you can look up um, some of the symptoms or some of the risk factors for certain things that maybe you think you might have or you're curious about, and mention those to your doctor that that might run in the family or you've experienced this. So it's creating maybe um, not necessarily a story per se, but a narrative, okay, where the doctor might feel more comfortable ordering these for you. Okay. So
Yeah, I would
sometimes,
say if a doctor is worth their salt, then, you know, I mean, if they actually know what they're doing, they will, you know, that's been my experience.
well, you'd be
Well,
surprised.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
if they're a decent doctor, they would do it. If they refuse, you probably want to find a different doctor. That's just
I would be in agreement with you. And, it's funny because I just ran into this personally, where my thyroid has shifted. I went through something last year. I still don't know exactly what I went through, what my body went through, but I can tell you it did. And my thyroid went, my TSH went up the highest it's ever been for me. It was still in range, but it's the highest it's ever been for me. And I said, because she just wanted to test my TSH. I said, can we do the free T4, free T3, and can we do antibodies? She goes, I'm not going to do the antibodies. And then, we were just talking, and I mentioned some of the other things that happened this last year. I said, my body just shifted. I don't know exactly what happened, but something happened. And then she said, okay, I'll put TPO on there, but not, that's the only antibiotic. I said, okay, I'll take that. So sometimes, and I wasn't making anything up. I was just, talking to her and letting her know. Sometimes we forget to do that because they're not asking specific questions. And they have a time, constraint too. Um, so sometimes if we just talk things through and kind of let them know what's going on, if they're good enough, they might connect the dots. But if they're not, then you're right. It's not the doctor for you. It's
Well,
time
yeah,
to
then
move
the other
on.
thing I find you also have to take into consideration is that sometimes they are hesitant because they they have found that insurance doesn't want to pay for it. And so you basically just have to say, hey, look, I need this done. And even if I have to pay for it, if it's that important to you, make that known that you're willing
Yes.
to pay even if insurance doesn't cover it.
Yes, and I do want people to know that actually we're really fortunate in the US where we have plenty of labs that you can get labs at cash prices. I do that I can order labs for my clients and very inexpensively. And it's worth every single penny it's like a thyroid panel, the whole thing, even with reverse T3, which is the most expensive of a thyroid panel. Um, I think it's still like 95 bucks, something like that. All
Yeah,
right.
that sounds about right because I've done
Hmm.
the thyroid panels quite a bit, and with a high deductible plan, I've had to pay out of pocket, and
Yes.
that's about right. Yeah.
And that's the other thing is if you do have a high deductible, sometimes just, and you don't want to deal with your doctor, just going and getting it done and paying out of pocket is sometimes, unfortunately, the easiest and best way to get it done.
Yeah,
It-
it just is, and it's worth having that information because once you have that information, then you can figure out what to do about it.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And if you don't know what to do about it, right? Um, hopefully you can find a coach, a practitioner. I feel like all of us need to have at least one or two people in our circle other than our Western medicine doctors to help us make decisions.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, and especially as we get, well, at any time when we're not at our best and feeling like we need support. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. Okay, so talk to us a little bit about how you help people, and I know that you have primarily a virtual practice, so people can definitely reach out to you. It looks like we have a link here for a lab check for what you call the pause years, that people can go and request that, and we'll
Yeah, that's
link to
actually a
that in the description
PDF.
below. Okay.
Yeah, that's a PDF they can just download, and there's a whole list of labs to ask for if you're perimenopausal, menopausal, why, and
Mhm.
how to ask for it. Yeah, I'm sorry, I
Okay, so
interrupted you.
let's also address a little bit, what are your thoughts on, like different kinds of hormone replacements, things like that, and how do you feel like some of those things can impact somebody? Let's say somebody knows they have an autoimmune, they were diagnosed with their autoimmune before they went into perimenopause,
Yeah,
so they know they have that.
yeah.
What, how would you, what would be the impact of those, and what's your opinion on some of those?
This is a big topic.
I bet it is. You could probably talk forever, but maybe give us just a couple minutes or
Give you
so.
the Reader's Digest version. Okay. There's such controversy around HRT for one big reason. Um, and that's the Women's Health Initiative study, which is, over 2 decades ago. But the narrative um, is still lingering, and what our doctors have been taught and trained, unfortunately, has been next to nothing in perimenopause and menopause and HRT, okay, for the last 25 years. So people need to know that, number one. Number two, when I just talked about how far-reaching our estrogen and our progesterone is, okay, across all systems in our bodies, having a really good understanding of how far-reaching and how and why I think is really important. And I do have a video that I've done to list that out that helps us have an understanding. It's kind of like when you are playing piano, you kind of have to know the basics, the theory behind things. And I think it's really helpful if women know exactly what's happening. So that's one thing. I am personally pro HRT. I've been on hormone replacement therapy myself for 18 years, okay? And some women do fine without it, and it's a very personal, individualized decision. It is. And I am all for supporting my women as far and as long as I can in whatever decision that she makes. Okay. But if I'm seeing lab work change and we're doing all of the things that we're supposed to be doing, and yet autoimmune markers are going up, okay, and it's affecting her, I would probably encourage her to possibly try a form of hormone replacement therapy. Okay. And I think, and there's many different types. So to educate yourself on that, and again, that's a whole nother podcast, but I do have it in my the video that I've made, the different types. But there's even some studies with so there's three different types of estrogen: estradiol, estrone, and estriol. Estriol is the weakest form that our body makes. They are actually, it is the weakest form, but it's also the most anti-inflammatory. And they are doing some studies. My understanding is they're doing some studies with estriol in a therapeutic way, so fairly high dosage of estriol for MS, things like that. So again, calming things down, and same thing with progesterone. So if you're doing everything that you know how to do and you've gotten help with it, your eating, your lifestyle, your sleep, your stress, your digestive system, everything that you know that you should be supporting, and it's still not working, then I would recommend you explore at least HRT. And unfortunately, we get frustrated with our doctors with kind of their lack of ability to think outside the box.
Hmm.
When it comes to hormones, it's even worse. It just is.
It is. Well, and I will say I'm on that. I started HRT probably about a year ago, and I have to say I really feel like it really helps me too, and you have to just, but like you said, you have to, it's all individualized, and if they do it properly, it's one of those things where it really doesn't work or you aren't getting benefit or the side effects are atrocious, you can go off it. It's not like you have to start it and you have to stay on it forever if it's not
You,
effective
y-
for you.
yeah, you do not have to stay on it forever. And I would say this, that hormone replacement therapy is not for the faint of heart, for either doctors or patient, because each woman is different in how she metabolizes hormones, how her digestive system is working, which is also part of that whole thing, okay, bringing hormones out. How she methylates. So methylation is part of metabolizing your hormones. Some women are not good absorbers from the patch. They're better with maybe creams or maybe a gel or maybe an injectable form. So, and then we have to have that balance of estrogen to progesterone, and then some women do testosterone, some women don't. So it's the Wild West in some ways.
Yeah.
I've been pretty lucky. I haven't had much problem. I did try a certain type of hormone replacement. It was called physiological dosing, where I wanted to try it because I wanted to have that experience so I could have a discussion with the client if they were curious about it or were on it, so I understood it. And I must be a super absorber when it comes to creams because my levels went way over the top.
Oh no.
Yeah, and I felt it. I felt it. I mean, I felt like I was Dolly Parton, and estrogen is an appetite suppressant, but everything's got to be in balance, right? So I had too much estrogen. I couldn't get enough to eat. I could not get enough to eat. And I think I gained 6 pounds. I was not a happy camper. So that was not for me. And I have found the level that's good for me, and I'm very happy with it. I do have a doctor that primary care, and this is something you'll run into. I'm 68, so I've been on hormone replacement for 18 years. There's no reason for me to go off of it, but there's still an old narrative that there is. And so we're butting heads right now. And I told her it was a deal breaker for me. And she finally relented and said, okay, I will send you to endocrinologist. If the endocrinologist gives you the thumbs up, I'm fine with it. I'm just not comfortable prescribing. It took her a while to get there, but she got there. So we'll see what this, I haven't been an endocrinologist yet, but it's it's learning how to advocate for yourselves. And when we're right in front of that doctor, they can be
It
a
can be
little bit
intimidating, and you can,
very, very intimidating and they can be nasty. I mean, it's like the first time I saw her, she goes, "You're on hormone replacement." She goes, she shook her head at me, and I looked at her and I said, "And I'm not going on." I'm drawing a line right there.
yeah, and that's just what you have to do. So, yeah, so that's great, Cindy. It's been a great conversation. Anything else that you want to share with people that I didn't bring up before we end for the day?
The only thing I want to bring up, and you may, bring that up in your mini podcast before, is that you're actually in the driver's seat more than you realize. And in our medical or sickness care system, you are going to have to spend a little bit of money, not a ton of money, okay? But a little bit of money that maybe you would spend on your hair or your nails or whatever the exterior thing is in order for the interior to continue to work properly. And I see how important that is as I continue to have older and older clients come to me and again watch my own cohorts or contemporaries lose ground and not really be vibrant or enjoy life. So, when we're younger, I think we want to look good, feel good, and we do when we're older too, but it just kind of shifts. It shifts a little bit where the importance, it just becomes more and more important because you want to keep your independence. You don't want to be independent or dependent upon anybody. So, starting at a younger age to really see where the normal is for you, I think is really important. And then learn how to track that. And if you have to, because you have a high deductible, and so just paying it out of your pocket, it's usually not more than a couple $100 to get what you need. It's worth every single
Oh
penny.
yeah. It's like the statement that a lot of us have heard that health is the real wealth, and what
It
good does
so
having all the money in
is.
the world do if you don't have your health? So,
Yeah,
that's just a reality of our healthcare system that you are going to have to pay for some things.
you are. You are. And people who have autoimmune disease and you've had to do your own fight already. You already know, a lot of you already know how crappy you can feel, right?
Mhm.
And other people that maybe have not had that experience, they go floating into, midlife and they're thinking that, what happens to their parents isn't going to happen to them. You guys are usually a little bit more careful because you've had to be more careful and more conscientious about your lifestyle and diet and everything else. So you're actually, unfortunately or fortunately, ahead of the game in some
Yeah,
ways.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's great words
Yeah.
of wisdom. Well, thank you for coming on. Great.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Okay.